The sun had barely risen, yet the asphalt of the empty highway seemed to stretch endlessly in front of Carol. Her eyes, bloodshot and tired, scanned the horizon, but there was no sign of hope, no sign of anyone who might offer a kind gesture to lift the weight of her world. The cardboard sign she held in her hands read Redwood Springs, a town she had never been to but had heard of, a place where her family once lived. The ink was smudged, the words barely legible, just like the remnants of her life. The night before, she had camped by a fire, burning her last match for light, using the charred remains to write the name of the town she hoped would give her a fresh start. A town that she was convinced could heal her, though she wasn't quite sure how. Her parents' tragic deaths had left her hollow. It was only a few months ago that Carol had lost everything. The house that once held the laughter of family was now silent, consumed in a fire that had taken her parents' lives. She stood there, lost and broken, carrying the emotional baggage of a past she couldn't escape. The road felt endless, a metaphor for her own journey, empty, desolate, with no clear direction. The weight of grief was heavy on her chest. Carol had hoped that moving to Redwood Springs might help her find the peace she desperately sought, but the loneliness gnawed at her, and she wondered if it would ever go away. There were moments, fleeting and brief, when the thought of her family, their voices, their laughter would rise in her heart. But then, reality would hit like a heavy wave, and those memories would drown under the crushing reality of her loss. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the sign higher, a feeble attempt to catch the attention of passing cars. Each time a vehicle passed her by, her heart sank just a little more. No one slowed down, no one stopped, no one seemed to care. She wasn't expecting a grand rescue, she wasn't expecting some miracle that would fix her life. But in that moment, she wished for a small act of kindness. She was desperate for anything that could make her feel like she wasn't completely invisible to the world. Her mind drifted back to the fire, to the memories of her parents. Carol's chest tightened as she remembered their faces, the faces of two people who had been her everything. Now they were gone, they had been the source of her greatest pain, and yet she still couldn't bring herself to let go of them. She blinked rapidly, trying to chase away the tears that threatened to overwhelm her, but before she could lose herself in the memories again, a sudden rumble broke through her thoughts. A van approached, slowing down. It was a family van, filled with the sounds of children laughing, yet there was a sadness in its slow approach, as if it, too, carried a weight of its own. Carol's heart raced. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she hoped, for just a moment, that maybe, just maybe, someone would be kind enough to help her. The van rolled to a stop, gravel crunching under its tires. The window rolled down, and a woman with soft, kind eyes looked out at Carol. "Hey there," the woman said, her voice gentle but curious. "Are you headed to Redwood Springs?" Carol's throat was dry, she swallowed hard, her emotions tangled, and for a moment, words failed her. She nodded, barely able to whisper, "Yes." The woman glanced inside her van at the children, who were all asleep, tired from a school trip. Her face softened, full of sympathy. "I just came back from a school trip," she said, motioning to the sleeping kids. "I'm really sorry, but there's not much space left." "I wish I could offer you a ride." Carol smiled faintly. She understood. She hadn't expected much, but the offer of kindness meant more than she could express. The woman hesitated, then added, "Would you like some water? Maybe a snack? I can't give you a lift, but I can at least do that." Carol's heart warmed at the thought. "Yes, thank you. That would be great." The woman smiled, her warmth filling the space between them. She rummaged through a cooler in the back of the van, pulling out 2 water bottles, a sandwich wrapped neatly in a Ziploc bag, and a ripe banana. She handed them to Carol with a soft, sincere smile. "Here you go. It's not much, but I hope it helps." Carol accepted the offerings, her fingers brushing against the coolness of the water bottles. A small but genuine smile tugged at her lips as she whispered, "Thank you. This means a lot." The woman's smile deepened, and she patted Carol's arm lightly, her expression maternal. "I hope someone comes by soon to pick you up." "It's not a safe place to be stranded," she said with a touch of concern before rolling up the window and driving away. As the van disappeared down the road, Carol stood there for a moment, holding the water and food in her hands. For the first time in days, she felt a flicker of comfort. It was a small thing, but it was enough to remind her that, perhaps, there was still some goodness left in the world. She leaned her cardboard sign against her dusty backpack and decided to take a break. The heat of the day was relentless, and the highway ahead seemed to stretch forever with no end in sight. Carol unwrapped the sandwich, the tuna feeling surprisingly satisfying as she took a bite, washing it down with the cool water. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself a moment of peace. The water tasted like a luxury in the searing heat, and for that brief moment, she wasn't so alone. But as she sat there, looking out over the horizon, something caught her eye. It was a vehicle. At first, it looked like a shimmering mirage in the heat, but as it drew closer, Carol's pulse quickened. It was an old, beat-up Chevy pickup truck, its faded green paint chipped and worn. And for the first time in days, a spark of hope ignited in her chest. The truck slowed as it neared her, and Carol, bracing herself, tried to make herself as visible as possible. The driver was an older man, his weathered face partially shaded by the brim of his cowboy hat. His eyes, though partly hidden, seemed kind, looking for a ride, young lady. He called out in a gravelly voice, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Hop in, but only if you've got a funny story to share. Carol's nervousness melted away as the man's warm laugh reached her ears. She beamed, feeling the weight of solitude lift just a little. Her mind, once heavy and clouded with grief, now felt lighter. She threw her backpack into the truck and climbed in. As the truck rolled on, Carol felt a strange sense of relief, a small sliver of peace in the midst of all her pain. She didn't know what lay ahead in Redwood Springs, but for the first time in a long while, she was ready to face it. If you're enjoying this story and want to hear more, make sure to hit that subscribe button and support the channel. It gives us the motivation to keep creating these heartwarming stories that help you connect with the characters and their journeys. Question for you: do you think the kindness of strangers can truly heal someone's emotional scars? Yes, small acts of kindness can have a profound impact. No, the pain needs to be dealt with internally, not externally. Leave your answer in the comments below. Let's discuss. Carol stood there, still clutching the cardboard sign, her hand aching from the weight of the world. She had watched countless vehicles rush by, their drivers oblivious to her presence. There was no comfort in the passing cars. No slow down, no glance in her direction. She wondered if they saw her at all. Or was she just a fleeting shadow on the side of a forgotten highway? Her thoughts spun in circles, each one darker than the last, as the heat of the day pressed down on her like an unrelenting force. Her soul felt just as dry and parched as the desert landscape surrounding her, but something about this barren stretch of road told her that there was still a glimmer of hope. Wasn't there always? She kept telling herself that she had to. Her parents' deaths had torn apart the very fabric of her life. She had tried to run away from the grief, tried to outrun the darkness that loomed so closely behind her, but each step only led her further into unknown territory. As the sun beat down, Carol found herself overcome by a deep weariness, the kind that doesn't just settle in your body but weighs down on your heart. She was tired of being strong, tired of pretending that everything would eventually get better. What did better even look like anymore? She had been asking herself that for days, but the answer was always the same: emptiness. Then, out of nowhere, the distant rumble of an approaching vehicle cut through the silence. It was faint at first, barely audible above the hum of the wind, but as it drew closer, the sound became undeniable. A vehicle. It was slowing down. Carol's breath caught in her throat, a mixture of hope and skepticism rising in her chest. She wasn't sure if she was imagining it or if this was real, but the van, with its fading paint and worn-out tires, had actually stopped in front of her. The window rolled down slowly, revealing the face of a woman. She was older, with dark hair that had begun to show strands of grey, and her eyes, kind but full of questions, met Carol's for a moment before she spoke. "Hey there," the woman said, her voice a gentle whisper that carried warmth in the coolness of the afternoon. "Are you headed to Redwood Springs?" Her words were simple, yet there was a softness to them that made Carol feel as if she wasn't invisible anymore. The woman's presence seemed to fill the space between them. She wasn't offering a grand rescue, no promises of a perfect solution, but there was something about the way she looked at Carol like she saw the broken pieces of her life without judgment. Carol's throat tightened, her emotions battling inside her chest. She wanted to say something, to tell the woman everything, but the words stuck. How could she explain the weight she carried, the years of grief she had been running from? Instead, all she could do was nod weakly. The woman continued, her voice soft but filled with concern. "I'm sorry, I just came back from a field trip with the kids. I can't offer you a ride, there's not much room. But would you like some water, maybe a snack?" Her offer was simple, but Carol felt something inside her stir, something that felt almost like gratitude. She hadn't expected anything from the woman. After all, she was a stranger, but as the woman spoke, there was a quiet assurance in her voice that made Carol feel like she mattered. For the first time in days, Carol allowed herself to feel something other than the emptiness that had been suffocating her. "Yeah," Carol replied softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you, that would be great." The woman smiled, a warm, genuine smile, and hopped out of the van. Carol watched as she rummaged through a cooler in the back, pulling out 2 water bottles, a sandwich wrapped in a Ziploc bag, and a ripe banana. It was nothing extravagant, nothing that would solve the problems Carol had yet in that moment. It felt like a lifeline. She handed Carol the food and water with a tenderness that made Carol's heart ache in the most unexpected way. "Here you go," the woman said. "It's not much, but I hope it helps." Carol took the sandwich and water, her fingers brushing against the cold bottles, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she let herself breathe. The simple kindness from a stranger, an act that cost so little but meant so much, was like a salve for the raw wound inside her. She smiled faintly, whispering, "Thank you, this means a lot." The woman gave her a nod, a knowing look in her eyes. "I hope someone comes by soon to pick you up. It's not a safe place to be stranded." She patted Carol's arm lightly, her touch warm and maternal. "Take care of yourself, okay?" And with that, she got back in the van, leaving Carol standing there, the warmth of the woman's kindness lingering in the air long after the van had disappeared down the road. Carol stood still for a moment, the food in her hands now nothing more than a symbol of something far greater, of human connection. She had been so caught up in her own pain, in the isolation that had clung to her like a second skin, that she had forgotten how much even the smallest gestures could matter. This woman, a stranger, had given her something she hadn't realized she needed, a reminder that kindness still existed in the world. Carol leaned her sign against her backpack and sat down on the side of the road. The weight of her grief was still there, the sorrow still buried deep inside her, but in that moment, as she unwrapped the sandwich and drank the cool water, she felt a strange peace. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make her believe, if only for a moment, that maybe everything wouldn't always be this hard. Maybe there was a chance for her to heal, a chance to stop running. She knew the road ahead would be long, and the pain would still be there, lurking in the corners of her mind. But as she took a bite of the sandwich, she realized that sometimes all it took was a small act of kindness, a glimmer of hope to remind you that you weren't completely alone. As the sun began to set, Carol couldn't help but feel a shift within herself. The world wasn't as cold and indifferent as she had once thought. There was still kindness to be found, even in the most unexpected places. And for the first time in a long while, Carol felt like she was allowed to hope again. The journey into Redwood Springs was not marked by grand gestures or dramatic moments, but instead, it was the quiet hum of the engine beneath her that kept Carol moving forward. The truck rolled down the empty highway, its tires kicking up the dry dust as they entered the town. Redwood Springs was smaller than she had imagined, more peaceful, more still, and somehow more welcoming than any other place she had ever seen. It was a town that seemed to breathe with the rhythm of the earth, slow and steady, like the pulse of an old heart. Carol sat silently in the passenger seat of the old green pickup truck, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes drawn to the passing scenery. The tall pine trees that lined the road whispered in the wind, casting long shadows across the streets. She felt the weight of their stillness, a stillness that felt both comforting and unsettling at the same time. It was a peaceful kind of silence, one that held no expectation, no pressure. She was just a stranger passing through, no one special, yet here she was, entering a new life, a life that felt like a distant possibility just hours ago. As the truck made its way down the main street, Carol couldn't help but notice the houses modest, with porches that seemed to call out for conversations, for gatherings that she had never been a part of. She felt the sudden ache of something familiar, something missing. She had never known a community like this where everyone knew everyone else, where the rhythm of life was slow and gentle, yet somehow fulfilling. The warmth of it almost took her breath away. Kevin, who had driven her here without a second thought, slowed the truck as they approached a turn. His voice broke the silence as he pointed to a house on the right. "That's the Jackson place," he said, his tone neutral, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, recognition, perhaps, or curiosity. "Haven't seen anyone there in years," he added, as the truck rolled past the house. Carol's heart tightened. The Jackson house, her family's house. It was smaller than she remembered from the stories. She had grown up hearing tales of it, but the house before her seemed to have lost its charm. The lawn was overgrown, and the shutters hung crookedly, like the house had grown weary, just as she had. The weight of those memories, the good, the bad, and everything in between, pressed down on her as she glanced out the window. Kevin glanced at her briefly, his eyes soft with understanding. "I'm sure it's not what you expected," he said quietly, his voice carrying a quiet empathy that made Carol feel like she wasn't completely alone. "But it's yours now, the new start, if that's what you want." Carol nodded, though her throat felt tight. A new start. That's what she had been hoping for, wasn't it? She wanted to believe that Redwood Springs could be the place where she could begin again, where she could stop running from the past. But in her heart, she still felt like she was dragging her old life behind her, a shadow that refused to let go. As they pulled up to the Jackson house, Carol could see the full extent of the disrepair. The house had clearly been neglected over the years. Its charm had faded, its once vibrant exterior now a dull, peeling shell. And yet, despite all of that, there was a strange pull in her chest. This was where her story had begun, where so many of her childhood memories had been etched into the walls. This was where her parents had once dreamed of a future, before everything had come crashing down. Kevin stopped the truck, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Carol just stared at the house, her mind spinning. This was where she was supposed to start over, but could she really? Could this broken-down house, with its crooked shutters and overgrown yard, really be the place where she could heal? The thought of living here, of finding a life here, seemed overwhelming, yet there was something in her that told her she needed to try. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice carrying a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. "I don't know if I could have made it here without you." Kevin didn't respond at first. He simply nodded, as if he understood. "You're welcome," he said simply, his voice warm, yet knowing. "I'm sure you'll figure things out. Redwood Springs has a way of helping people find what they need. It's a quiet town, but it's full of surprises." As the truck drove away, leaving Carol standing in front of the Jackson house, she felt a strange calm wash over her. There was no turning back now. This was her new beginning, whether she was ready for it or not. She wasn't sure what the future held for her in Redwood Springs, but she knew one thing: it was time to stop running. The house creaked as she stepped inside, the air thick with the scent of dust and neglect. Everything about it felt old, forgotten, just like she felt. And yet, there was a kind of peace in it too. The stillness that surrounded her felt strangely comforting, as though the house had been waiting for her to return, to give it a second chance. She dropped her backpack onto the wooden floor and let out a heavy sigh, taking in the room that would soon become her new home. There was so much to do, so much to fix, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she was just going through the motions. She felt like she had a purpose again. Her eyes drifted to the window, where she could see the same pine trees that lined the streets of Redwood Springs. They swayed gently in the breeze, casting long shadows across the yard. It was peaceful here. And maybe, just maybe, this could be the place where she found peace for herself too. As Carol sat down on the worn-out couch in the living room, her thoughts began to quiet. She wasn't sure how long it would take to heal, or if she ever would. But for the first time in months, she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. The past might never fully leave her, but Redwood Springs had given her something she hadn't had in a long time, a chance. She wasn't alone anymore, and perhaps that was all she needed to begin again. Carol stood at the threshold of the house, staring at the piles of dust and old furniture, her thoughts swirling in a fog. There was so much to do, so much to fix. The house had once been a home, a place where laughter and life had filled every corner, but now it felt like nothing more than a hollow shell. It was the kind of place that had been left behind, much like herself, forgotten by time and distance. The weight of it pressed down on her, but somehow, she felt the urge to keep moving forward. She wasn't sure why, but something deep inside told her that this place was where she had to start again. As she began to gather her things, her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from something more complex, an emotion she couldn't quite name. Her solitude, her grief, the overwhelming sense of loss, everything seemed to collapse in on her. She hadn't realized how much she had longed for connection until now. The idea of being alone in this house, alone with her thoughts, terrified her. The truth was, she didn't know if she could do it on her own. She was running on empty, and she wasn't sure how long she could keep pretending that she wasn't breaking. That was when the knock came. At first, she thought it was her imagination, the kind of moment where hope plays tricks on you. But then the knock came again, louder this time, insistent. Carol hesitated for a moment, unsure if she was ready to face anyone. She wasn't used to people coming to her, especially not now, when she felt like the world was falling apart. But she pushed aside the discomfort, straightened her shoulders, and walked to the door. When she opened it, she found Maggie standing there, her warm smile spreading across her face. Maggie's presence was like a ray of sunlight breaking through the clouds, gentle, inviting, and full of unspoken understanding. "I noticed you're here," Maggie said with a knowing look, as if she had been waiting for Carol to arrive. "I wasn't sure if you needed anything, but I thought I'd stop by and see if I could help." Carol opened her mouth to refuse, to explain that she didn't need any help, but the words died in her throat. She didn't need help. She told herself she could do it all by herself, but deep down, she knew that wasn't true. She didn't want to be alone. The silence in the house, the emptiness that echoed around her, was more than she could handle. Before she could say anything, Maggie stepped into the doorway, her voice warm and matter-of-fact. "I've got a couple of hands that could help you out. It'll be faster, and I can promise you, it'll be a lot more fun." Carol could see the sincerity in Maggie's eyes, no hesitation, no judgment, just a simple offer of help, of companionship. And in that moment, Carol knew she didn't have to do this alone. Maggie wasn't asking for anything in return. There were no strings attached, no expectation. It was just a genuine gesture, an extension of kindness that Carol hadn't realized she needed so badly. She had been so focused on her own pain, her own isolation, that she had forgotten that people still cared, that kindness still existed in the world. "I'm not sure I can take on much help," Carol said, her voice quiet. "I don't want to be a burden." The words came out more hesitantly than she intended, as if the mere thought of accepting help was foreign to her. Maggie's response was simple. "You're not a burden, Carol. We help each other around here. That's what Redwood Springs is all about. We don't do things alone." Her tone was soft, but there was an undercurrent of strength there, a quiet confidence that made Carol feel something shift inside her. It was the kind of strength that didn't come from independence, but from community, from the shared belief that no one should have to face their struggles alone. Carol felt a lump form in her throat, an unexpected rush of emotion flooding her chest. She had spent so much time trying to carry the weight of the world on her own, convinced that asking for help would make her weak, but here, in this small town, with Maggie's kindness and willingness to help, she realized how much she had been missing. The idea of leaning on others didn't make her weak, it made her human. "I don't know what to say," Carol murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "You don't have to say anything," Maggie replied with a smile. "Let's just get to work. You can thank me later." And with that, she stepped inside, her presence immediately filling the space. As Maggie and her family began to move through the house, Carol felt the tension in her body slowly begin to unravel. She had never been good at accepting help, never good at letting others in, but with each passing minute, she felt something change. The house that had felt like a tomb, a place where the ghosts of her past haunted every corner, began to come alive. Kevin, Maggie's husband, was a quiet man, but his hands were skilled, and he moved through the house like a man who had done this before. His daughter, Anna, was a whirlwind of energy, always moving, always smiling, as if the act of helping someone was the most natural thing in the world. They worked together as if they had done this 1,000 times before, their laughter and banter filling the air like a warm blanket. For the first time since arriving in Redwood Springs, Carol felt like she wasn't just passing through. She wasn't just a stranger in a strange town, she was becoming part of something. A family, a community. She didn't have to prove anything to anyone. She didn't have to carry the weight of her grief on her own. There were people here who would walk with her through it, who would offer their hands and their hearts without question. And that, perhaps, was the most healing thing of all. As they finished cleaning up the living room, the house already began to feel like a home. It wasn't perfect, it was far from it, but it was hers. And for the first time in a long time, Carol felt like she could breathe. The sense of isolation that had clung to her like a second skin was slowly, surely, lifting. Maggie sat down beside her once the work was done, and for a moment, there was only silence, comfortable, peaceful silence. It wasn't the kind of silence that made Carol feel alone. It was the kind that made her feel safe, like she was in a place where she could heal. A place where she could finally begin to believe that maybe, just maybe, things would be okay. You know, Maggie said after a while, breaking the silence, this town, this little corner of the world, it's not perfect. But it has a way of bringing people together, of helping them heal. You don't have to do this alone, Carol, you never have to be alone here. Carol nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had found something she hadn't even known. She was searching for a place to belong. And though the road ahead would still be difficult, she now knew that she had people by her side, people who would walk with her, no matter how hard it got. Thank you, Carol whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you for everything. Maggie smiled, her eyes warm with understanding. That's what community is for. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Carol felt the weight of the world lift, even if just for a moment. In Redwood Springs, she had found something she hadn't known. She needed acceptance, support, and, above all, the knowledge that she didn't have to walk this path alone. And in that, she saw a glimpse of hope, a light that, for the first time in a long time, she believed she could follow. Carol woke to the soft light filtering through the curtains, the morning air fresh with the scent of pine from the trees outside. The house, though still a work in progress, no longer felt foreign. It had become her space, her refuge. As she stood in the kitchen, preparing a simple breakfast, she felt a new energy coursing through her. For the first time in months, she wasn't just surviving, she was beginning to live again. It was a quiet rebirth, one that didn't demand anything of her except to be present, to accept what was unfolding. It wasn't the grand change she had imagined when she first arrived in Redwood Springs, but it was enough. It was more than enough. Each morning now felt like a new chance to rebuild. She no longer saw the house as a reminder of what had been lost. The walls, the floors, even the cracked windows had begun to hold something else, the possibility of growth. The memories of her parents, of the pain that had been so overwhelming, still lingered, but they no longer consumed her. There was space now, space for healing, space for hope. And as she moved through the house, tidying up and organizing the chaos that had been there before, it felt like she was organizing her own heart, slowly making room for peace. Carol had learned, over the past few weeks, that healing didn't come all at once. It wasn't a sudden, overwhelming wave that washed everything away. Healing was in the small, mundane moments. It was in the cup of tea she brewed every morning, the walks she took through the woods behind the house, the conversations with Maggie and Kevin, and even the quiet evenings when she allowed herself to simply rest. It was in the acceptance of where she was, right here, right now. Redwood Springs hadn't fixed her life, it hadn't erased the grief, the heartbreak, but it had given her the space she needed to start again. The work she did in the house, clearing away the debris of her old life, felt symbolic of the work she was doing within herself. Every room she cleaned, every item she sorted, was an act of reclaiming her life. She wasn't simply restoring a home, she was restoring herself. And though the progress was slow, it was real. Each day brought something new, an unexpected smile from a neighbor, a moment of laughter shared with Maggie, a quiet evening watching the sunset with Chance by her side. These moments, though small, were the foundation of something that would grow stronger over time. In the past, Carol had believed that healing was a destination, a place you reached when the pain was gone. But now, she understood that healing wasn't a fixed point, it was a journey. It was about the steps you took, no matter how small, and the courage to keep moving forward even when the road ahead seemed uncertain. Carol's journey wasn't linear, it wasn't all about grand moments or dramatic change. Some days, it felt like she was treading water, stuck in the same place. But then there were other days, like today, when she could feel the shift, the change happening within her, slowly but surely. As she walked through Redwood Springs, taking in the town's simple beauty, Carol realized that she had begun to feel a connection to this place, a connection she hadn't thought possible. The people here were kind, genuinely so. They didn't ask her to explain herself or rush her to heal, they accepted her just as she was. Maggie had become a steady presence in her life, always there to lend a hand or offer words of encouragement when Carol needed them most. Kevin, though quiet, had a way of making her feel like she belonged, like her presence in Redwood Springs wasn't just a passing moment, but something meaningful. And then there was Chance. The dog she had rescued from the side of the road had become more than just a companion, he was a symbol of Carol's own healing. Like her, he had been abandoned, neglected, but in his own way, he had found a new home. And now, together, they were learning how to navigate this new life. He had become her daily reminder that even the most broken things could be repaired, that second chances were possible, even if they didn't look exactly as you imagined them. As the days turned into weeks, Carol found herself growing more comfortable with the idea of staying. She still wasn't sure if Redwood Springs was her forever home, but it felt like the place where she could begin to rebuild. She had learned that she didn't need to have everything figured out right away. There was no rush. She could take things one step at a time. And in the meantime, she could focus on building something that had eluded her for so long: community. Not just the kind of community where people lived next door to each other, but the kind that offered real, unconditional support. The kind where people took care of each other, where there was no shame in asking for help, where kindness was the default. Carol knew that healing wasn't something that could be forced. She couldn't just will herself to feel better or move past the pain. It would take time, and that was okay. What mattered was that she was allowing herself to heal. She was letting go of the expectations she had placed on herself, the belief that she had to fix everything all at once. She was learning to accept the journey, the mess, the uncertainty, and most importantly, the people around her who were there to help her along the way. As the seasons changed and the warmth of summer began to give way to the crisp air of fall, Carol found herself changing too. She had started a small garden in the backyard, something she had never imagined herself doing before. It wasn't perfect, there were still weeds to pull, patches where nothing grew, but it was hers. And in the garden, Carol found something she hadn't realized she was searching for: patience. Patience with the earth, with the plants, and with herself. She was learning to nurture not just the soil, but her own spirit. She was learning that growth, both in nature and in herself, took time. That it wasn't always immediate, but that it was always possible. One evening, as she sat in her garden, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Carol allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought about how far she had come since that first day she arrived in Redwood Springs. She thought about the pain, the loss, and the emptiness that had been her constant companions. And then she thought about the new beginnings that had sprouted from those very same places, the new relationships, the small acts of kindness, the sense of belonging that was slowly, surely, taking root in her life. She wasn't fixed, and she wasn't perfect, but she was growing. Carol smiled to herself, feeling the weight of her own healing process. She wasn't in a hurry anymore. She had learned that sometimes the best thing you could do for yourself was simply to allow yourself to grow at your own pace, to trust that the healing would come in its own time. For the first time in a long while, she felt a quiet peace settle over her, knowing that she was exactly where she needed to be. Carol's journey in Redwood Springs is not just a story about a new beginning, but a reflection of the universal human experience of healing, growth, and rediscovery. She arrives in a place full of strangers, a house full of memories, and a heart full of pain, but through the passage of time, she learns to embrace the quiet beauty of acceptance and the transformative power of community. The journey, though deeply personal, is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the strength we find in others, and the possibility of renewal, no matter how broken we feel. At the core of Carol's story is the realization that healing isn't a destination, it's a process. The story starts with her grief and isolation, but it ends with a quiet acknowledgement that healing is something she must allow herself to experience, step by step, day by day. Healing isn't an instant thing, nor is it linear. Carol's journey wasn't about erasing the past or forgetting the loss she had endured, but about accepting where she was, giving herself the grace to heal, and learning that it's okay to lean on others along the way. It's a reminder that while we often seek to fix things immediately, the most lasting transformations happen gradually. Carol's experience also highlights the importance of community in personal healing. Her arrival in Redwood Springs was marked by silence, uncertainty, and isolation. Yet, through the simple, genuine acts of kindness shown to her by people like Maggie and Kevin, Carol realized that true healing requires a support system. The town of Redwood Springs, its people, and their willingness to be there for her, became her foundation for growth. She learned that it wasn't just about starting anew physically, it was about becoming part of something bigger than herself, where others could offer both support and acceptance. This shared sense of community is a lesson that resonates deeply with each of us. No matter how independent or self-sufficient we may think we are, we all need a community that lifts us up, especially when we can't carry the weight ourselves. In the quiet moments of her life in Redwood Springs, Carol also learns that healing is about patience. It's not about rushing to fix everything, but rather about understanding that true growth requires time, nurturing, and self-compassion. Like the garden she began tending, Carol realized that personal growth is much like tending to a plant. You cannot force it to bloom, you must nourish it, give it time, and allow it to flourish at its own pace. In our own lives, we often want to fix things quickly, to move past the pain as if time alone will heal the wounds. But, as Carol discovers, healing requires us to be patient with ourselves and to trust the process. Growth can't be rushed. The lessons from Carol's experience are universally applicable to all of us. The story of her healing isn't just about physical space or a new location, it's about the power of self-compassion, community, and patience. For anyone dealing with loss, change, or personal struggle, Carol's journey serves as a reminder that healing is a process, and we must honor our own pace. It's also a reminder that, while we can't control every aspect of our lives, we can control how we respond to hardship. By embracing community, leaning into kindness, and allowing ourselves the space to heal, we make room for personal growth and transformation. So, what can we take away from Carol's journey and apply to our own lives? The first lesson is simple: healing doesn't happen overnight. It's a process, and it's okay to take time, whether you're dealing with a loss, a difficult change, or just the pressures of life. It's important to allow yourself the grace to heal. Give yourself permission to feel your emotions, to ask for help, and to trust that, with time, things will get better. Second, remember the importance of community. None of us are an island, and seeking out support when we need it is not a sign of weakness, but of strength. Surround yourself with people who care, who understand, and who will walk with you as you navigate your struggles. And lastly, be patient with yourself. Like Carol, give yourself the space and time to grow. Understand that healing doesn't have a clear timeline, and that's okay. Be kind to yourself, trust the process, and remember that every step forward, no matter how small, is progress. Now, I'd love to hear from you. How do you approach healing and personal growth in your life? Do you believe that taking time to heal is important, or do you think we should move forward quickly to move past our pain? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's engage in a meaningful conversation and learn from each other. If you found value in this story and would like to support the channel, please consider subscribing and donating, no matter how small. Your support allows me to continue creating content that helps people like you. I've been doing this for a long time, and even though I'm not as young as I once was, I want to continue helping and giving back to society. Your contribution, whether in the form of a donation or a simple subscription, gives me the motivation to keep sharing valuable insights and stories with you. Thank you for being here, and I look forward to continuing this journey with you.